Hello, everyone. We'll make a start in just one moment. We're just going to wait for a few more people to join us. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to today's event, Warrington Speaks Out on Climate. My name is Emma, and I'm part of the team at Hope for the Future. If you haven't heard of us already, Hope for the Future is a climate communications charity which works nationally to equip communities and individuals to communicate the urgency of climate change with their local politicians. We feel that it's vitally important that MPs and constituents have rich and challenging conversations about the climate. And we facilitate this by providing training for individuals and local groups and tailored support at every stage of engaging your elected representative, from writing your first letter to attending a meeting to following up. As part of our work, we also support individuals and groups to organise local events with their MPs, and that's what brings us here this evening. You can find out more about how we can support you in engaging your local MP by visiting our website, www.hftf.org.uk. And I'd also just like to say a huge thank you to the European Climate Foundation for funding our events project and are making events like this one possible. So what brings us here today? We've been working with the local Warrington CEE Bill Alliance group over the last couple of months to organise today's event. The group is passionate about acting on the climate crisis and wanted to spark a conversation to ensure climate action is well and truly on the agenda in Warrington. To do this, in this event, we've set about to bring together a diverse group of perspectives from across Warrington to speak out on climate. Through the vehicle of storytelling, our speakers will share with you their experiences, their thoughts, and their visions. And why are we using stories? I think that this quote from Solar Sister sums up the reason for doing this really well. And they say, stories are the essential building block of empathy and human connection. Since the beginning of humankind, storytelling has been used to connect, engage, inspire, heal, and create a brighter future. And that's what we hope we'll achieve in this event today. Our stories range from personal struggle to professional realizations to local movement building and reflections on climate that span a lifetime. In this truly unique event, we'll hear stories from a whole host of local perspectives, including nature conservation, faith, and business, among others, demonstrating, we feel, that there is a really strong local mandate for climate action in Warrington. We're also so pleased to welcome local Warrington MPs Charlotte Nichols and Andy Carter, who are both joining us this evening. Following our speakers' contributions, Andy and Charlotte will also share their stories, reflecting on the local perspectives that we hear this evening, and also reflecting on the question, what concerns them as an individual and as a resident of Warrington about climate change. A huge thank you to those of you that are joining us this evening. We've had a massive amount of interest in this event, and we're so pleased to see so many of you are attending live. And hi to those that are watching it on demand. So whether you're already involved in climate action or you're just interested in hearing stories from your local town or your local area, we believe that this promises to be a really, really special evening. So before we get into the event, we'd really like to find out a little bit more about you. And during the event today, you'll have a few opportunities to kind of share your voice as well. So to kick off, we just wanted to ask you a question. How concerned are you about climate change? My colleague Laura, who's with me today behind the scenes, will pop up a poll shortly, which you should all be able to take part in. Lots of votes coming in. So for those of you that are watching it on demand, it says, how concerned are you about climate change? And the options are extremely concerned, quite concerned, somewhat concerned, not too concerned, not concerned at all, and don't know. Laura, I think we can probably share the results now. So yes, thank you. We can see that pretty much everyone who's attending today's webinar is extremely concerned about climate change. A few of you are somewhat concerned, and we'll see how you feel at the end of this event. We're not looking to kind of make you more concerned, but hopefully inspire you with today's stories and all the kind of different dimensions that the climate crisis has. So we'll just stop sharing that. So while I finish up this introduction, and I'll just go over some quick housekeeping, I'd also like to just ask you a question, and you can pop your answers in the chat. There's no right or wrong answer, obviously, but we'd just like to get you guys talking and hear a little bit more about you. So we'd just like to know what made you interested in attending today's event. So yeah, any responses would be very welcome, and please do get involved in today's discussion. So today we'll be hearing from a variety of local speakers from across Warrington, all of whom have come to share their stories about climate change. But just before we get started, I'd like to take you through our schedule for the evening so you know what's happening. So following this introduction, we'll welcome our first group of speakers who will each take it in turns to share their story. As we hear from the speakers, I really do invite you to kind of sit back and listen and really take in their messages. We've had the opportunity to read them already, and I can assure you that they're all brilliant. So after part one, we'll take a short 5-minute break just to allow you to digest what you've heard so far. And we'll also use this time to kind of invite you to share your thoughts on the stories that you've heard using an interactive word cloud that we'll explain a bit later. After this short break, we'll be back for part two, where we'll be hearing from our final 3 speakers, as well as our local Warrington MPs, Charlotte and Andy. And then before we close, we'll hear from one of the local volunteers who's been working with us to organise this event, Nina Dar, who'll be sharing her thoughts on the stories that we've heard and also setting out a vision for how we can build on this event. So lastly from me, before I hand over to our first speaker, I'm just going to run through some quick housekeeping. This webinar is going to be recorded, so it will be made available for you on demand to watch again and share. We'll be sending all of our attendees a follow-up email tomorrow with a link. Sorry, it won't be tomorrow, it will be next week, with a link to this recording and also directing you to Hope for the Future's latest resources. And we will be doing our absolute best to stick to time this evening, and we're scheduled to finish at 7. Finally, I'd just like to ask that everyone be respectful of all the contributions given in tonight's event, both from our speakers and your other attendees in the chat. So without further ado, we'll begin part one of the event, where we'll be hearing from our first round of speakers. So I'd like to invite Angel, who'll be kicking off today's storytelling, to turn on your camera and share your story with us.
Hello everyone, thank you for coming. I'm Angel and I'm a youth climate activist based here in Warrington. And this is my story about flooding and the impacts of the climate crisis on young people. When the heavens open and the clouds turn grey, when the wind sings and darkens the day, when the rain pours and the streets fill with water flowing down to doors, my house stands still, for my house is on a hill. I see the sandbags at people's doors, the driveways filled with rain, the welly boots covered in mud and the umbrellas being used. When I was young, I'd see photos of flooded roads mere minutes from where I lived, but I didn't care, for my house is on a hill. I've heard of water wading in living rooms and broken Wi-Fi that affects the Zooms, of parks that are now lakes and cars rushing to brake, the road no longer tarmac but water and fog. When I was young, I didn't care. It didn't affect me, so why should I worry? But I grew up and learned about empathy and learned about how the climate crisis can cause more floods which can be deadly. Now I think of last winter when we had downpours of rain followed by inches of snow. Then as soon as the snow was gone, the ice covered the roads. I remember lacing up my boots to wade through mud that had turned into bogs and puddles that had turned into ponds. In the last few months, we've seen rain, snow, wind, floods, and sunshine, with the weather going from 20 degrees down to -1 within the same week. English weather has always been temperamental, but there is very much a difference between temperamental and crisis, and we are getting closer and closer to crisis. In January of this year, Warrington streets were under 3 feet of water, with homes being evacuated and reports of record levels of flooding. Now, just over 2 months later, we are basking in the sun as if it never happened. We cannot let this be the new normal. We cannot let people's homes and lives be ruined by increasing extreme weather due to the climate crisis. In addition to this, reports show that many places in Warrington, including Orford, Latchford, and the town centre, could be underwater by 2050. In 2050, I'll be 48 years old. Now is the time for action. For being truthful, decades ago was the time for action, but none was taken. Now we're in a state of crisis. And this is the problem. Privileged people ignore problems that do not affect them until it is too late, because to them, their houses are on a hill. People in the global north view the crisis as a thing of the future, whilst people in the global south are already dealing with the devastating effects of the crisis, because our houses are on a hill. The billionaires who exploit their workers and run highly unethical companies continue to destroy the environment because their houses are on a hill. The upper classes ignore how the crisis affects the lower classes because their houses are on a hill. White people ignore the fact that people from Black and ethnic minority backgrounds are disproportionately affected by the crisis because our houses are on a hill. The councilmen and women, mayors and politicians all ignore the crisis because they all live on a hill. Boris Johnson continues to take harmful actions against the environment because his house is on the highest hill of them all. When I didn't care as much about things that didn't affect me, I was an ignorant child. But these people are our leaders, and it is their duty to protect us. They must act now before it is too late. As a young person, it is both heartbreaking and infuriating to know that people have known about the impacts of climate change for decades, and instead of taking action, they led with greed and created a crumbling world for younger generations to be born into. It is heartbreaking to know that we have already lost so many lives, both human and animal, to this crisis. It is heartbreaking to know that the home I have grown up in could be underwater by the time I am 50. It is heartbreaking to know that me and so many of the young people have lost a lot of the joy that comes with being young, as we have been busy organising and partaking in climate actions. We deserve to enjoy our youth, and we deserve to have a future. It is not fair. We are losing hope, we are scared, and we deserve climate action. I hope that these politicians, prime ministers, CEOs, and other powerful people step down off of their hills and take the appropriate action. The climate crisis is happening now, and therefore action must be taken now. So please, save the environment, save the sea, save the animals, save the streets, save the houses, save the planet, save the people, and save me. Thank you for listening. I will now pass over to the next speaker, which I believe is Ian.
Hi everyone. Can you hear me and see me? Yeah. Okay. Hi. Hi everybody. I'm sorry I was a little bit late. I was just in a clinic. My name's Ian Sinner. I'm a consultant respiratory paediatrician in Alder Hey Children's Hospital in Liverpool, and thank you very much for the opportunity to meet and talk with you today and share my story, which is about health and the impact of the environmental problems that we see on our children. So I went into my job as a respiratory paediatrician because I love the idea of working in a sphere where I can help children to breathe better. And I think about children, not just now, but as they go through their life. Our job as paediatricians is to enable children to live their best life, fulfill their potential, and be everything that they want to be. And therefore, anything that gets in the way of that, as we've just heard so powerfully and passionately, anything that gets in the way of children and young people living their best life is something that we need to stamp out. So when we look at the direct impact of air pollution on the lungs of children, what we see is that, that it causes swelling, damage, irritation, and inflammation within the airways. It's akin to breathing in secondhand smoke. And part of the problem that we find in children is that they are particularly vulnerable to pollutants in the air. So they are the right height to breathe traffic fumes. They breathe more air than adults, and they've got the rest of their life to suffer the consequences of what they breathe. And we see this in adults as well. So when we look, even just at Warrington, somewhere between 90 to 150 people each year die prematurely because of the higher levels of air pollution. And what we're talking about there then is at least a Hillsborough level of number of people dying, avoidable, preventable deaths just in Warrington. And what we find is that there's an inequality within that the younger people will suffer, pregnant women will suffer, and people living in the most deprived areas will suffer the most. But this is certainly something that affects everybody. When we think about climate change itself, again, this isn't something that's necessarily going to be of a direct consequence to everybody, and it certainly isn't going to be of direct consequence to many of the policy makers. But the people that are most likely to suffer are the people that have their entire life ahead of them. And what we do with climate change will affect millions of people. What we see in terms of health, and what we will see in terms of health, is that as the world gets warmer, opportunities to be healthy decrease. We know that there is a food poverty pandemic that is just as important as the COVID pandemic. When we thought that people were at risk of COVID, we were building hospitals within 2 weeks. We've known for decades that people are at risk of not having enough food, and yet what we're doing is kind of living in a world where that food production is going to become more difficult and more expensive, and people are going to be priced out of giving their children a healthy start in life. So to sum up, I think my take on the environmental emergency is that it's not necessarily just about the environment, it's about the impact of that environment on health. We need to stop describing the problem, because we know there's a problem now, and all we'll ever be able to use to describe the problem is observational research, and observational research will always be subject to interpretation, and we can't have another generation of people trying to decide whether the research is of high quality enough to make change. It is all of high quality, enough to drive change. The results are all pointing in the same direction. The results are all saying that air pollution and climate change is bad for health, and in particular, it's bad for women and children, and in particular, it's bad for women and children who live in deprivation. And so we need to start thinking about how we end that injustice to prevent premature mortality, both in Warrington and around the world. And I think I will hand over now, if that's okay. And I'm sorry, I haven't got the list in front of me, but I know that one of our friends will be speaking after me, so I will stop my video and mute.
Hello, my name's Emma and this is Ashley, and we're both co-founders of the Green New Deal Hub in Halton. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Green New Deal UK team, we'll quickly go over their main goals and how this then impacts us as a hub.
So the Green New Deal UK was started back in 2019. It's not affiliated with any political parties. However, in order for the movement to succeed, we rely on people power, such as everyone that's here today, and political power. We need this political power in order for important movements like the Green's Job campaign, which is what we're going to be talking about today, to move forward. The UK team's main focuses are decarbonising the UK, protecting and restoring habitat, transforming the economy, promoting global justice, and building secure jobs, which again is what we're going to talk about now.
As a hub, we are based in Halton, but we're also the closest hub to Warrington, St Helens and Liverpool. Our main aim at the moment is building secure jobs. Using figures from the RSA, the Green New Deal UK team believe that over 1.9 million jobs are at risk of permanent loss from the long-term impacts of COVID-19, and a further 1 million could be permanently lost over the next 2 years. Between July and September 2020, there were 314,000 redundancies. As you can probably imagine, there's a lot more now.
So growing up in Runcorn, all we ever used to hear was there's no jobs, what are you going to do after you finish school, what are you going to do, train in this job because it's the only, train in this field because it's the only job that you're going to get. And as a young adult who has the responsibility to decide what you want to do at like 14, 15, 16, this is just more unnecessary stress. So luckily I was able to go on and train as an actor, so that was the job that I was doing. But obviously when the pandemic hit, the need for that became non-existent. And I then went on to work as admin staff in a counselling company. So over the past year, I've seen the need for one job decrease, whilst the need for the other job just got bigger and bigger and bigger. Once things go back to normal, people are going to need the government to create jobs to replace ones that have been lost, but not just for the economy side of it, but for the mental health side of it. So we need people to be trained as doctors and nurses and counsellors and therapists, so that people who've been working on the front line and these key workers can have the support that they need to process the past year, year and a half, 2 years, however long it takes for us to get back on our feet.
So I work for a law firm in Liverpool. I've always been extremely interested in doing what I can for the environment, as I imagine all of you have. As I grew up and spoke with more people about this topic, I realised it was a general consensus that people wanted to help stop climate change and people wanted a fairer community, but they just didn't know where to start or how to help. This was my inspiration for helping create the local hub with Ashley, to give people who wanted to help the resources to actually make a difference. The campaigns being run by the Green New Deal were particularly interesting to us, considering where we grew up. We wanted to work on issues that were specifically important to our local area. So this is where green jobs come in. The UK team estimate that a total of 1.2 million jobs can be created in the UK in the next 2 years. Green jobs is one of the key principles of the Green New Deal. With the help of the government, it must create millions of new, well-paid jobs that are secure and future-proof for anybody who needs one.
From jobs that prepare us from winter to lower our bills, like insulating houses, to jobs that tackle climate change, like building wind and solar farms, to key workers who keep our communities strong and healthy. These are all low-carbon, labour-intensive jobs, but more importantly, the jobs that sustain life. People usually think that green jobs just mean like solar and wind farms and jobs that'll decarbonise the UK, but it also means like doctors and nurses. Like, think of how different the pandemic would have been if we had the staff and the resources to cope with the scale of patients. It also means people like postmen and bin men, obviously being at home, we're ordering a lot more stuff in and we've got a lot more waste, yet the need to collect and deliver these things has like gotten higher, but the people aren't there to do these jobs. So if we can get the training put in place and the jobs put in place to fill these roles, then it'll work out better for us. And it's other careers such as like teachers, people in the arts, agricultural aspects, care workers, bus drivers and train drivers are also considered as green jobs due to their low environmental impact.
Using figures from the 2011 census, this was the latest we could find whilst researching, we could see that 5,961 people were registered unemployed in Warrington. That's 242,499 in the Northwest and 1.8 million in England and Wales. That was 10 years ago, before there was even a pandemic, so imagine how high those numbers will be now. We do have figures relating to how many green jobs can be created in Warrington and the Northwest that our team at Green New Deal UK have worked out using figures from NEF and WBG. However, we're under embargo until the 19th of April. Once this has been lifted, we'll be publishing these figures in our local papers and on our social media platforms, so make sure you're looking out for them. These mainly focus on care work as well as clean energy work.
So what we need to do as the hub and as everyone who's watching today is we need to encourage our MPs to fight for green jobs. We're lucky as a hub to have Mike Amesbury from Weaver Vale and Charlotte Nichols, who's going to be speaking today. They're supporting us and they agree with what we're saying, but we need more people. We need more people in the Northwest to fight for this so that it can then be taken to the government to then be put in place. We have the figures, we have the ideas, but we need the government to actually implement the policies and make green jobs a key part of our country's future. So what you can do is, again, write to your MPs, follow our social media. So we're Halton Hub GND on Instagram and Twitter, and Halton Hub on Facebook. Look out for any petitions we put out, any letters to the government, and share them and make sure the word's getting out. Say that you want to see green jobs. We recently had an event on Twitter where people across the UK were all talking about why they want to see green jobs and how it'd benefit them. So if you go on Twitter and search the hashtag green jobs for all, you can see videos from people there. So thank you very much for listening. I hope what we've said is resonating with people and you want to see this put in place. The next speaker, I believe, is Ben. So we will go now and let Ben talk.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much, Ashley and Emma, and thank you all to those who have come today. Great to see so many people here. So my name is Ben Tolhurst. I am 51. I represent a global organisation who works in the property sector, but the relevance to Warrington is that we're responsible for about 1,000 jobs in Warrington when you count both the direct and indirect employment. So, for example, one of our biggest sites is Golden Square Shopping Centre, which I'm sure you are all familiar with, where many thousands of people visit and loads of money is generated for the local economy, as well as our hub for community activities. So I'm here to talk about the importance to business of tackling the climate and ecological crisis. And in particular, my story centres on my experience of engaging with this issue, raising awareness amongst both our staff and our customers, and starting to think about what comes next. So my story begins in February 2019, and guess what? We were having a heat wave. It was 20 degrees. And I remember distinctly everyone around me at work with their happy voices and their plans for the weekend barbecue. I remember distinctly the news channels with messages of great news, everyone, it's another scorcher. And I remember distinctly thinking, you know what, something's not right here. 20 degrees in February, this is really bad news for the planet, the weather, the species, the crops on which we depend. So this is a warning sign, and really I need to do something. So I'm not a scientist, I'm not an environmentalist, and whilst I've tried to do my bit over the time, I really have not grasped the enormity of the problem until then. This is what I did. I firstly researched climate science so I could understand the facts properly and produce a presentation setting out what the challenges we have in relation to climate change and why we absolutely have to address them. And one of the key reasons from just a purely business perspective for now is around jobs, and it fits nicely with the last speakers. In 2010, for example, the cost of damage from climate globally was $570 billion. In 2030, that's going to go up to nearly $1 trillion, and by the end of the century, we'll be up to $18 trillion. And just to put that into perspective, $18 trillion is over 6 times the entire UK's economy. And all of this has got to be paid for somehow, never mind the effects on people. And when people say, well, we can't afford to move away from industries which are harmful to the climate because people will lose their jobs, actually, do you know what? It's the other way around. We can't afford not to move away from industries which are harmful to the climate because people will lose far more jobs. And I felt really shocked and angry. How could we, as a civilized society, be in a position where there was such little awareness and training? The second thing I did in my story was that I wrote a blog, and I published this to all UK colleagues. And in that blog, I talked about the science of climate change and the impact on businesses, as well, of course, as impact on individuals. And, you know, I discovered something really quite interesting that took me aback slightly. Through doing this blog, I actually discovered there were loads of people worried about the impact of climate change, just like me, but didn't really know how to have a conversation about it at work. So what I did then is I set up a load of sessions, not just with staff, but also with clients. I probably got to about 600 people in different ways. And what I did was to enable people to talk about, to understand what was going on, talk about their feelings, give their chance to air their views, and most importantly, what sort of actions we might do as a business. And this was really encouraging and you know, giving hope for the future. And the third thing I did, the final thing I did, was to take the conversation right up to the top, to the UK board of my organisation. Again, opening up the conversation to raise awareness and get the business to understand at the most senior level what the problems are and how we need to act. And this was well received, and we've done a load of things since. In terms of learnings, I think there's three things I'd probably call out. So firstly, the climate crisis will have a huge impact on jobs and therefore people's well-being. Just look at COVID for an example of just a glimmer into what's ahead of us if we don't fix this. And because of this, it's deeply irresponsible if we don't take really quite drastic action right now, even if it means some difficult decisions in the short term. By not taking action, we're letting people down, our staff, our colleagues, our friends, our families, our communities. The second thing I learned was that people are genuinely worried about the impact of climate, but are generally not very well informed. There's very few people who really grasp the enormity of it and what to do about it in the workplace. And thirdly, from the work I've done, it's really clear to me that the government just isn't doing enough to raise awareness of the consequences to people and their businesses of the climate crisis. It isn't doing enough to bring the right levels of leadership, of legislation to make this agenda move quicker. And because the government is just really slow and poor to act, it's left to businesses, it's left to other groups to take the lead. We had to lock down all of our staff and our offices during COVID, way ahead of the government's decisions to do so, because we looked at the data and we had to take action. We need faster action. And it really shouldn't be like this, should it? Because at the end of the day, we've all got the same outcome in mind, which is to sustain our businesses and of course the well-being of our people. So finally, in terms of the next steps for me personally, so I'm going to dedicate a lot more time to having discussions and raising awareness amongst businesses of this issue and specifically what to do about it. I've recently spoken at 2 events in Birchwood and would want to continue my engagement with other groups in Warrington. I think my vision for the future, three things: that firstly, we citizens, we grasp the knowledge of the emergency and we take positive action towards it. Secondly, businesses need to view every material decision through the lens of a climate and ecological emergency. And then thirdly, governments and politicians, please don't make this a party political agenda. This needs to be cross-party priority. After all, surely the primary role of government is to protect its citizens. It's not doing that right now. And what a greater call to action could there be than this? So for those on the call, please do get in touch with me if you'd like to talk further about the implications on business of the climate crisis and what to do about it. Can I thank everybody for listening to me? And I would like to hand over to Peter as the next speaker. Peter, over to you.
Thank you, Ben. Hello, everyone. My name is Peter Owen, and I lead an environmental and fuel poverty charity called Energy Projects Plus. I thought that rather than talk about statistics, I would describe a real person who is facing fuel poverty. So imagine a pensioner. It could be your gran, your mother, a neighbour, smartly dressed, tidy house, appears well organised. One such person, let's call her Jean, contacted us last month because she had an issue with her boiler, which was replaced 12 months ago through a national funded fuel poverty scheme. The problem she reported was the boiler keeps coming on during the night. Jean explained that the installer had left no details, so she had no idea who they were. So she was stuck and had turned to our charity for help. I agreed to call in to see her because it just sounded like the thermostat had needed adjusting. So it shouldn't be more than a 5 or 10 minute call in on the way home. Jean showed me her high efficiency boiler, which had been installed at floor level in the back bedroom adjacent to the party wall. In the middle of the night when the boiler came on, it disturbed her and also her neighbour. The thermostat is in the hallway. It is a programmable thermostat that can control the time the boiler is on or off, as well as the temperature during those periods, and has 3 other features to optimize the firing and switching off of the boiler to maximize efficiency. Jean then explained that she controlled the central heating simply by turning the temperature dial up or down, depending on whether she wanted heat or not. The installer had asked her whether she wanted him to set the thermostat up and show her how to use it, or just to use the dial. To Jean, it looked like a complicated device It had an 8-page instruction manual, and so she had no confidence she would be able to use it. And so she said, I'll just use the dial. So that programmable thermostat is playing no active part in controlling her heating. I visited the following week to return the instructions for the thermostat. And in discussion with Jean, she said she had switched supplier in October and had been promised paper bills so she could keep on top of her usage. She hadn't received any bills yet, despite asking, but she had been requested to increase her monthly direct debit by £20 to cover her current use. She was struggling to afford the extra £20 a month. Jean then confided that she was already paying off a previous fuel debt of nearly £1,000 that had built up because she had switched supplier, as everyone is encouraged to do. But no requests for payments had been made by either supplier. She hadn't received any bills, and so she hadn't paid anyone. But what she had done was use the money she would have spent on the fuel to pay other bills. I commented it was very cold in her home. The thermostat said it was 14 Celsius, and Jean admitted that she had not been using the central heating because she was frightened she would run up a debt again. We talked it through, and she agreed to start using the heating again. So from an unusual situation of my boiler comes on randomly overnight, here is what is really going on. A pensioner has had a high efficiency boiler installed through a national scheme by a contractor she doesn't know and can't contact, and has efficient heating controls she can't use. She's frightened to put her central heating on because it comes on at odd times during the night when she doesn't need it, and she doesn't know how much gas she is using. So she is rationing her daytime use when she actually needs the warmth. So what's my point for telling you this particular story? Well, it's very important that the most vulnerable are fully included in new programs to ensure a fair and just transition to a low carbon world. But as we start to accelerate our programs to achieve carbon reduction goals, and the government redirects its funding to renewable technologies and hard to treat insulation measures, we must remember that the occupants need to understand them beforehand and then be able to fully use and get the best out of the measures installed. Low-income and fuel-poor households can't be treated as guinea pigs for technologies or approaches that may disrupt their personal or financial balance. They are the least able to deal with financial shocks. And it is imperative that a support program is included in those schemes installing measures to ensure that occupants are making informed choices from the outset and have their personal circumstances considered and help provided where needed, and also have a sustained safety net if issues arise after the installation of measures. While we need to focus heavily on solving our climate emergency, the answers must also recognise and address the immediate needs of our vulnerable residents. Without doing so, these people will continue to be left behind. So thank you for listening to my story, and I'm pleased to pass on to Jen, who's going to follow on from me.
Hello, my name's Jen and I'm a mum to 2 boys and I live in Lynn, and I'm going to talk today about a family perspective, and I'm going to start by telling you a little story about a plastic-free experiment that we tried in 2019. So it started as an experiment, a bit of fun, something to stick on Instagram. I thought it might save us a little bit of money. I thought I might lose a bit of weight if I could stop buying plastic wrapped biscuits. I'm pretty green. I do a lot of recycling. I don't drive a Range Rover. I reckoned I could nail plastic free July. And so it began. On Thursday, I failed to save any plastic. I went to buy some lunch at work, and the rule was if I couldn't buy it plastic free, then I couldn't have it. And I came away with a banana and a can of Coke. And that's a can of Coke that I later found out was lined with plastic and a banana with a plastic sticker on it. So I went home hungry. And day after day followed, and I came to realise that the more you try to live waste-free and the more you try to be ethical and you try to be green, the more you realise that the system is stacked against you. As a family, you have to make really hard choices between affordable and sustainable, when actually we need things to be both. So this family experiment to reduce waste that was supposed to be fun, it really brought into consciousness the truth of how difficult it is to live the way we need to in a system that's designed to overexploit resources. Here's another example. We've spent the last few months trying to get a heat pump installed in our home. We're trying to retrofit a gas system to a 60s house, and it shouldn't be hard. It should be in reach for everyone. The science is absolutely clear. We have to stop burning fossil fuels as soon as we can. So we need a whole-scale upgrading of the UK housing stock to make it carbon neutral. It's a great opportunity for skilled jobs in a time of recession. And we're passionate about this, and we can borrow the money we need quickly and cheaply whilst the government funding kicks in. And we're quite stubborn and we're quite persistent, but it's still hard. I know how lucky we are, but if it's hard for us, it's totally out of reach for most people. Greening your home is simply too difficult for the vast majority of people in the UK. As a child, I watched famine on my television screen, and I worried about war and crop failure and mass displacement, and I choked on the leaded petrol fumes, and I learnt about the Yanomami at school and the rainforest and the disappearing polar ice, and I watched Tomorrow's World, and it promised me technology and a shining green future and power from the sun or from the atom, and I believed that the grown-ups had it. It was on the telly. I learned about the greenhouse effect at school, and then there was a Climate Change Act and a Paris Accord, and I trusted the government and politics to do the right thing, and I took my place in the collective denial of the scale of our destruction of the planet, and I blindly placed my faith in those who seek power. It's hard to say this, but when I look at what's happening now to our beautiful planet, I feel so desperate and so let down, and I never once thought that my own children would have to see those same things on the television 30 years later. Because I was frightened and angry then, and they are frightened and angry now. I've been complicit in the destruction of the forests and the melting of the ice and the failing of the crops and the displacement of the peoples. And many, many people would say, well, I need to clean up my act. It's my actions that have caused this. But actually, it isn't all my fault. I have limited power. I can't stop the government funding gas exploration in Mozambique. I can't stop a new coal mine being built under the sea in Cumbria. Even when it comes to micro-consumerist actions, I need help. It needs to be easy for me and for everybody to make the right choices. I can't do it on my own. None of us can. No matter how much I try to be green, the system is set up for me to fail. If I finally get my heat pump, if I get my pasta at the refill shop, if I never buy a palm oil filled plastic wrapped chocolate digestive biscuit again, it's a drop in the ocean. It doesn't matter how many second-hand reusable nappies that I washed and carefully line dried. It doesn't matter how much I do as a consumer. It won't matter. I am trying my best to green every part of my life, but I am thwarted at every stage by a political system that doesn't want change at anything like the rate we need it. I can't look my children, or in fact any young person, for it's them who will live with this, in the eyes and tell them that I did nothing. So this is what I did. I went to London and I sat in the road and I exercised my democratic right to peacefully protest. I spoke to anyone who would listen. I've got friends who have signed up to this event today and they will testify to that. I stopped flying. I changed my diet. I turned the thermostat down. You can see I'm all cozy here today because it's freezing. I took my baby with me. I showed him that we weren't alone, that there are other people who know about this, that they are also asking and begging for action now. And what I am doing right now, publicly at this event on the record, is that I am asking you as RMPs to support the climate and ecological bill. I'm speaking at this event today, and I'm sure you can see that I don't find this kind of thing very easy, because honestly, I believe that the scale of the challenge we are facing is so enormous that we have to come together and set aside political differences. We need to use a different way to find a way forward that works, that is fair, that brings everyone along, that leaves no one behind. I think the CEE bill could do this. It could be the first step in us working collaboratively to really make the changes we need at the pace we need them. We've seen what happens this year when politics overtakes science. We need to listen to the experts, and then we need to decide together how to share the burden of this change so that those with the broadest shoulders take the most weight. But we can only do this if you as our MPs are brave, if you take us seriously and you follow the science and you trust the people that you represent. My 11-year-old can't do anything about this, but he will live with the consequences of our inaction if we don't. For his sake, please talk to your colleagues, talk to your leaders, use your platform and your privilege to make this bill law. Thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you so much, Jen, for sharing that story. And that concludes part one of our event. A huge thank you to all of our speakers that we've heard from so far. Angel, Ian, Ashley, Emma, Ben, Peter and Jen. Within this first half, I think we've already seen some of the breadth of the current conversation that's happening in Warrington on climate change. And I personally am feeling incredibly inspired by the diversity of perspectives that have been showcased already. And actually overwhelmed by how brilliant all of our speakers have been so far. I'm sure that you'll join me in thanking them in the chat box, as you have been doing already, for how wonderful they've been. I really can't wait to hear from our remaining speakers in part two. So we're going to take a very short 5-minute break now. This is just to allow you to kind of sit with the stories that we've heard, process them, have a think about those experiences. You can also use this opportunity to kind of just get up and stretch your legs a bit, so you're feeling fresh for part two. But while we take a break, we're going to leave you with a question. So we want to know, how do the stories that you've heard so far make you feel? So during the break, we invite you to kind of contribute your thoughts anonymously to our virtual word cloud. That will be on screen shortly. If, like me, you're feeling inspired or overwhelmed, you could add that, or potentially you're feeling, worried or empowered or keen to act. Whatever you're feeling, we'd love to include your voice as part of today's event. So as it says on the screen, you can share your words by going to www.menti.com and inputting the code on your screen, 2769988. Alternatively, you can also use your smartphone and scan the QR code on the screen, which will take you to the webpage where you can pop your words in. So we'll leave it up just for another moment so you can make note of the number. I think Laura will probably put it in the chat too. But Laura will now share the word cloud on screen, and as you add your words, you'll see them appear. So we're running pretty much on schedule, but we'll start the next part of the event at 6:25. So yeah, please enjoy your break as a refresh and do contribute to the word cloud if you would like to. If you've got any questions, just pop them in the chat. Thank you so much for taking part in that. It's been really nice to see it kind of shift and change as people have kind of contributed to the cloud. And I actually saw a message from Holly in the chat that said, it's really interesting and kind of amazing to see how different people's emotions are right now. And I totally agree with that. I was also really touched to see someone said that they were proud of Warrington. And I think, yeah, you should be proud. All the stories we've heard so far have been brilliant. We also had lots of words like energized and galvanized and inspired. And I really hope that, you know, between other emotions, that we can really build on that feeling that we've had following today's event. The word cloud won't disappear. We'll keep a record of it, and we'll make sure that we send it out to all of you post-event. So thank you so much for taking part in that. We'll now hear stories from our remaining speakers, Richard, James, Dinah, Charlotte and Andy. I'm so looking forward to hearing their contributions, and I hope that you are too. So without further delay, I'm going to invite Richard to turn on his camera and share his story coming from a faith perspective.
Hello, everybody. Good to see you all, or hear you all. My name is Richard Pearce. I'm 75 years old, lived in Lymm for 30 years before moving recently to Appleton. I'm retired, involved as a volunteer in a variety of community initiatives, including a community hub and cafe, a woodland management scheme, and a community energy company, which has installed solar panels on all 4 primary schools in Lymm. We've also helped many residents and community organisations to reduce their energy bills and carbon emissions. I'm here today as a representative of Churches Together, Lymm District, to provide a voice from the faith community in Warrington. Although I represent a Christian perspective, it's important to point out that all major faiths in the world are united in sharing a common purpose to act as custodians of the earth, to care for the environment, and to act urgently to protect it for future generations. In a letter to the Prime Minister last October on the subject of COP26, Faith for the Climate and the Climate Coalition, together with over 60 signatories from a wide range of faith groups, said the following: climate change affects humanity at the deepest level, raising profound questions about our relationship with the living world. As faith leaders in the UK, we know this, especially because of our engagement with the poorest communities here and around the world who are already suffering the most. We must all try to find the moral courage to confront these questions and to transform ourselves and our society. Climate justice is a key issue for faith groups. It's the primary focus for Christian Aid Week in May this year, and their campaign highlights the choice we now face as we emerge from the coronavirus pandemic. We can go back to business as usual, perpetuating the climate crisis and the growing inequality, or we can become campaigners for climate justice, taking positive strides towards a healthier, safer future for all. Faith groups in the UK are already taking urgent action, with thousands of places of worship switching to renewable energy and religious groups divesting from fossil fuels and investing in measures to protect the environment. In the United Reformed Church Pastorate in Warrington, we have embarked upon the Eco Church programme, which is taking us down a path towards achieving net zero carbon targets, changing our lifestyles, and supporting international environmental initiatives. I got involved in this because I believe that caring for God's creation is central to our mission. So I'm passionate about encouraging people and organisations to meet the urgent challenges of climate change and climate justice, especially for those who are most at risk. The charity which operates the Eco Church programme, A Rocha, reported recently that over 3,000 churches have now registered for the programme in England and Wales. They say Eco Church has become a national community learning together and stretching across all sizes and styles of church. It has also gained the strong support of many denominations as a key tool for them to achieve their own increasingly ambitious carbon reduction targets. And there are similar initiatives across many other faith groups, including, for example, Eco-Sikh, Eco-Synagogue, Eco-Mosque, Eco-Dharma, and Hindu Climate Action. In the months ahead, governments and financial institutions will continue to spend massive sums in response to the pandemic and its economic impacts. Governments will present climate commitments at COP26 in November. These actions must not perpetuate an outdated economic system that relies on fossil fuels and the destruction of the very forests, waters, oceans, and soils that make life possible. Instead, they should accelerate renewable energy development and energy efficiency programs, ensure universal access to clean water and air, affordable clean energy, and food grown with respect to the land. This transition represents a great opportunity for job creation at a time when many are facing redundancy and unemployment. But it will require long-term and consistent policies and programs to encourage businesses to invest in recruitment and training with confidence. Wealthy countries such as the UK should take responsibility for a larger share of emissions reductions to support a global, just transition and leave no one behind by increasing support to the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change at home and abroad. Based on my own experience and the other voices today, I'm convinced that there is a committed and fast-growing community of people and organisations here in Warrington to demonstrate what can be achieved if we act together urgently to tackle this climate emergency and to promote climate justice. I sincerely believe that this event is just the impetus we need. Thank you for listening. Now I'll pass over to James.
Hello, so I've actually got some photos for you here for you to see. So I'll just quickly share my screen so you can see them. But I'm the Wild Campaigns Officer for Cheshire Wildlife Trust. So let's go into that. There we go. So I hope you can all see that there. I'm here today to talk to you about peat. So if I ask the question, what in nature can help us fight climate change, I bet everyone's going to say trees. And that's exactly why I don't want to talk about trees and I want to talk about peat today, because it's like everyone's sort of got really excited about one piece of the puzzle and forgot the rest of it's missing. So what is peat? How would you know it? Because many people probably don't know what a peatland is. So you might recognize it from like the sea of cotton grass you might see on the horizon with bobbing in the wind in the Peak District maybe, and those murky pools of water. And you might also know it for the smell of smoke on the horizon as the peatlands in the distance are burning and the wind's bringing it over. But the reality is peatlands aren't just up in the Peak District, they're not up in our upland areas on their own. There are some around Warrington in the lowland areas, and the clue's really in the name. So bog, mere, moss, that usually gives an indicator that there's peat there. And peat forms in these really sort of wet conditions because of this type of moss that's really important in forming it, and that's called sphagnum moss. And you can see there, it's quite this vibrant yellow colour sometimes, and that's great for storing water. And when it breaks down, it forms peat. So why is it so important? Peat is fantastic for biodiversity, first of all. So it not only forms in these really wet conditions, but it forms in these really acidic conditions as well. So you often get some species of plants and types of animals that aren't even found necessarily anywhere else. I mean, just look at this sundew here. It's this very alien looking plant growing out the sphagnum moss there. Yeah, it just looks like something from another world. And that's actually a really carnivorous plant that eats insects. So there's really important aspects of peat for biodiversity, but it's a really important tool in the fight against climate change. So I talked about trees. Actually, peat's far more effective at storing carbon. So in the UK, 3.2 billion tonnes of carbon is locked up in our peatlands, and that's compared to 1 billion for trees and woodland. So it's 3 times more effective in the UK at storing carbon. So we've got that picture there, and yet our peatlands are in a really bad state. Over the years, we've damaged them through building, through agriculture, and we've planted trees in the wrong places, which has taken all the moisture out the ground and stopped peat from forming. And we're cutting it unbelievably to put in compost, of all things. It's quite ridiculous in a way that we're in a climate and ecological emergency and we're destroying one of our best carbon storing habitats for compost. It doesn't make sense at all. And peat takes such a long time to form. So what are we doing about it at Cheshire Wildlife Trust? Well, there's a site you might not even know about on the outskirts of Warrington called Holcroft Moss. It's a site that's not open to the public because this site has never been cut for peat ever. I'm not saying it's in brilliant condition because it's surrounded by agricultural land, so that's been drained, the site's lost loads of water, and it's stopped it from being able to form peat as effectively as it once would have in the past. So we spent a lot of time obviously putting drainage in, not drainage, sorry, the opposite of drainage, barriers in to stop the drainage of the site, to help it re-wet itself, so that peat can form. And as I said, peat is really slow forming. Since the last ice age, it's been forming, but at 1 millimetre per year. So after 1,000 years, you only get another metre of peat. It takes that long to form. So it's ridiculous in a way that it's being destroyed. And we're really part of a bigger movement, a group of organisations called the Greater Manchester Wetland Partnership. And right the way from Warrington to Greater Manchester to Lancashire, we're trying to restore a network of peatlands that can help store carbon and also provide vital habitat and nature wild corridors for nature to move around and thrive in. But yeah, as I said, we're fixing the problem in a way. We're trying to restore all these peatlands. At the same time, they are being destroyed. And as I said, the almost most frivolous reason is for gardening. It's one of the biggest reasons peatlands are being destroyed in a way. So 10 years ago, I guess the government realised this was a problem as well. And they said that they wanted to introduce a ban on peat sales in gardening. And they said that we want all peat retailers to ban gardening retailers to ban peat-based gardening products. But they only made this ban voluntary. So as a Wildlife Trust, we decided we'd find out how that got on, because 10 years has passed now. How did they do? So we did a survey of all the big garden centre chains, and we found actually only 1 in 20 has actually committed to going peat-free by a particular date. That's on target. So that was Travis Perkins, so hats off to them for actually doing it. But I think what this proves in a way is that this voluntary target to ban peat sales just does not work. We need something much firmer, something much more concrete and set in law that makes these retailers stop destroying our peatlands for compost. So I'll just pick on B&Q actually. B&Q 2001, they said they were going to go peat free in 10 years, and we're in 2021 and they're still saying they're going to go peat free. It doesn't work. So what we're calling on is all of you in the public to ask our government to stop the sale of peat compost and stop the use of peat in gardening products, because we're in a climate emergency, we're in an ecological emergency. We need our peat in the ground, storing carbon, providing vital habitat for wildlife. We don't need it in plant pots. So if there's anything I can ask you to go away and do today, it's to really put pressure on our government by signing our petition to make it a legal requirement to not put peat in our compost. So you can do that. You can ask your MP, speak to Andy, speak to Charlotte, tell them that it's really important that we have these peatlands and we protect them, because as I said, they're not just important for biodiversity and also for climate, they're really important places of recreation around here as well, and important to the people of Warrington. So thank you very much for listening to me, and I will hand over to the next speaker.
Hello, my name's Dinah Robertson. I've lived in Lymm for almost 30 years. I worked for the British Council and then Cheshire East Council. I'm retired now, but I am on the committee of Lymm and Thelwall U3A, and that keeps me busy. I was born and brought up in the northeast of England. The main industries there were fishing and coal. Of course, there were hundreds of coal mines all over the north of England. You can look them up on a map and see the quite astonishing number of mines that existed. The miners were very much respected as hardworking and doing a job we all depended on. We burnt coal in our fireplaces and kept warm at the hearth. There were deep shaft mines, drift mines under the sea, and open cast. It was dangerous work. My father, who was a doctor, had to go down the pits at times to deal with medical emergencies after accidents. People breathed in dangerous fumes, and soot landed on the washing and stained our houses black. Now those pits have closed and huge numbers of young men had to find different work. We know far more about the effects of those industries on our health and on our climate. Then came the oil generation, the revolution of North Sea oil and gas that brought prosperity to the country. I know I've been very lucky. The towns and cities were cleaned. We've had central heating all my adult life. I learned to drive at 17 and I've driven for nearly 50 years. I've travelled by air for work and I've often taken flights once, if not twice a year to go on holiday. So I have enjoyed a lot of benefits from our consumption of fossil fuels. But now we need another revolution, and urgently. The rise of carbon and methane entering the atmosphere has been gradual, but a critical amount has happened in my lifetime, and especially since about 1960. Many people my age, as well as younger people, are worried about this crisis and all its aspects. The impact of rising temperatures on many species which are at risk of extinction and on the oceans, the potential for rising sea levels to cause catastrophe on a massive scale, leading to people being displaced from their countries and becoming climate refugees. The potential for social breakdown is huge and nightmarish. As has already been said, individuals can do a certain amount, eating less meat, using less plastic, buying locally grown foods, traveling less, consuming less. I'd like to see the nudge unit doing a lot more to encourage far more people to make such changes to reduce their impact on the climate and on the environment. But individual actions are not enough. Action is needed on a large scale. We need governments to do more and much faster. The UK has shown a lot of commitment and innovation, but we need to step up the pace, and our leaders need to put climate and the environment at the very top of their agenda as we emerge from COVID. This disease has shown us all what can happen to society. There is likely to be a better acceptance of the need for change now to avoid the worst of the next crisis, i.e. climate. I appreciate that we need to take everyone on the journey to accept that change to lifestyles is needed, and I think there's an opportunity to do this. There is a better understanding now that new threats can and do overwhelm our systems if the right action is not taken at the right time. My son is based in the Northwest and he works in sustainable energy projects, advising on solar farms, wind farms, and enormous battery storage plants. He's in touch with lots of clients in energy. He tells me many of them are really keen to move into sustainable projects, but they cannot take the risk as private businesses. They need help from government and the finance sector to enable them to take these risks. Mark Carney, former governor of the Bank of England, says the government and finance need to create the environment so that the private sector can invest and make the transitions needed to new forms of sustainable energy. They can't do so without support led by governments. I want you to know that a lot of people in this area care about this, and we want and expect our MPs to be active in pursuing positive changes to meet our carbon reductions urgently. As an example, I have recently started a local U3A group to help ourselves to learn more about these issues and understand them better and what needs to be done. I've found that there are 65 U3A climate groups in England and Wales, just one indicator of how widespread this concern is. I think climate change can seem difficult and remote and overwhelming, especially when people are concentrating on their day-to-day priorities. But like COVID, this is a genuinely international issue, something we all have to work together on. I hope you'll take away from this that a lot of people of my generation care deeply about the climate and the environment. We want to see our leaders helping everyone to appreciate that work is needed urgently, so that measures can be accelerated and we can avoid the worst of the catastrophes that threaten our children and grandchildren. We have transitioned on a vast scale before. Look at the Industrial Revolution. Look at all the coal mines that we've closed and moved away from. We can and must make another transition, and there's very limited time to do it. Please do all you can to push for urgent action and make this a top priority. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm now passing on, I believe, to Charlotte Nichols, MP, please, who's going to speak next.
It's not letting me start my video. It's saying the host has disabled it. Can you try again? Oh, there we go. Perfect. Hello, everyone. Sorry about that brief technical issue there. So as Dina said, my name is Charlotte Nichols and I'm the Labour MP for Warrington North, and it's great to be here today. As we rise to meet the twin challenges of our post-coronavirus economic landscape and the climate emergency, today's event couldn't be more timely. My very first speech in Parliament, known as your maiden speech, was in the Queen's speech debate on a green industrial revolution. And very much the core of my work in Parliament outside of my front bench duties as Shadow Minister for Women and Equalities has been on a Green New Deal and an industrial strategy for the North West. I'm a member of the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Select Committee, an officer of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Hydrogen, and the co-chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Nuclear Energy. So this means things like lobbying the government for the Energy White Paper, hearing evidence from sector bodies on decarbonisation, holding the government to account on our preparedness for COP26, and building strategic partnerships in our community with businesses, industry, and the third sector. We have, for example, about 4,500 people and growing in Warrington North who work in civil nuclear, which produces hydrogen as a byproduct. We have a number of places like the National Grid compressor in Rixton that could support hydrogen storage, hydrogen trains being manufactured down the road at Alstom, and in projects like the H21 and HyNet projects that need that hydrogen, and a wider transport sector, including our own municipal bus company that can move towards either electrification or hydrogen use to not only decarbonise, but to help take more cars off the road by improving local and regional connectivity. We've got opportunities through our proximity to things like the Mersey Bay Tidal Lagoon, and obviously Woolston Weir Tidal within Warrington North, the council's own solar farm, which they are looking to use to address fuel poverty locally whilst also decarbonising. So there's a lot going on here and a lot to be proud of. But all of these things don't happen by themselves. And I think our efforts to decarbonise have not been at the pace that they could have been because of siloed thinking, both in government and in industry, rather than taking advantage of these synergies that exist, cooperating and collaborating together. At the same time as the share of renewables in our energy mix has massively increased over the last 10 years, the number of green jobs has actually reduced according to the ONS, and this is not what a just transition looks like. We know from our national experience of moving away from certain fossil fuels like coal in particular, and the impact that that had on coalfield communities, including in Warrington and surrounding area, that unmanaged decarbonisation would be an absolute disaster. So we need a plan for green growth with employment and skills right at its very heart. There are, I believe it's 15 companies that are responsible for 1/6 of the UK's carbon emissions annually. And the point's been really well made earlier in today's contributions from the panel that as much as we all have a responsibility to do what we can to reduce, reuse and recycle, to think about our use of plastics and our diets, especially meat, we can't individualise the issue. We need the net zero and climate emergency agenda to be right at the centre of policy making across every area of government, from the obvious DEFRA and BEIS to the Department for Housing, Community and Local Government, Transport, Education, Trade, and how we use our procurement, investment and pension scheme rules to fund this. Our ambition must meet the scale of the challenge ahead of us. So I've really enjoyed today's discussion, which has been very much the sort of holistic consideration of the different puzzle pieces of public policy that we need to address if we're going to make progress. And as Parliament will shortly be prorogued and private members' bills such as the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill will fall, please rest assured that the underlying aims are being taken forward, and that I look forward to working with all of you to achieve this. So thank you very much for having me today, and anyone that would like to meet to discuss some of these points and how we can work together in the future, I'm always happy to hear from you. So thank you very much. And I believe it's now incumbent on me to pass over to Andy.
Charlotte, thank you very, very much indeed. And thank you to Hope for the Future as well. Firstly, for the invitation to come and listen, and secondly, for the chance to speak. And it really has been fascinating hour and a half. Tackling climate change is important. It's a priority for me, and it is a priority for government. And I want to start by reflecting on what Angel said right at the start when she talked about living on a hill. And one of the things I've tried to do since becoming a member of Parliament is get off the hill and go and see what's happening. And I had my wellies on the day that we had, on the evening that we saw flooding in Warrington. I carried furniture out of people's homes in Sankey Bridges at 2 o'clock in the morning and called electricians to get people back on. And I saw the awful impact of flooding in our town, in our streets, and on people's lives. And that awful impact hasn't gone away. This morning I called to see a family living on Warrington Lane in Lymm, who are at the moment living in rented accommodation. And when you look through the window and look into their home, the ground floor is devastated. And I suspect the costs will run into probably hundreds of thousands to rectify it. And the impact on their life is immense. And that's because water poured off the fields and into their home. It impacted them then, and it's impacted them now, and it will impact them into the future. And coming off that hill and seeing those real life experiences tells me very clearly that this is an issue that we can't ignore. I'm really pleased that the Chancellor in his budget a few weeks ago set out as one of his priorities to tackle climate change as part of that economic recovery that so many people have talked about this evening from the COVID pandemic. How do we do this? Well, Ashley and Emma actually, I think, hit the nail on the head with a lot of what they talked about, and the same with Ben as well. Jobs and business have to adapt, have to change, so that we can start to see the impact of recovery coming through in a green way. And it needs long-term policies to drive that change. But we can really start by making more green investments into our economy. We need to build back greener. I'm sorry to use a build back phrase, but we do need to build back greener. And there are very effective ways of creating jobs and commitment from that Green New Deal to secure those jobs that Emma and Ashley talked about. Actually, the girls, though, did talk about government creating jobs. And I would argue that it's not just government that need to create jobs. We need public and private sector to create green jobs. If I look at Warrington South today compared to February last year, we've got about 1,700 more people claiming unemployment benefit as a result, probably of the pandemic. And as furlough ends, that's going to increase. So green jobs are really, really important. And I'll pick up a little bit more on that in a second. We shouldn't forget this year that we are in a really good position on the world stage to lay out to everybody about our commitments to moving forward from a green perspective. We're presidents of both G7 and COP26, and we have an opportunity to lead the world. And we've already taken the necessary legislative steps to pass a net zero emissions law ahead of any other major world economy, but we can't stop there. And if we do, we will very quickly be passed by other nations that are gearing up to take those steps forward. So we have to take action to innovate, to research, and to reskill. And as Ben talked about, business has got a really crucial role in delivering on that. All types of business, particularly construction, installers, designers. We need to get low carbon heating into people's homes. We need to improve flood defences. We need energy and water efficiency. We've got to maintain those wind turbines and build more wind turbines and fit more solar panels. They're the places where we can really drive jobs. And this is a massive issue for business. Before I came into Parliament, I dealt with companies both here and around the world in their supply chain, and there is a drive for engagement in tackling climate change on their agendas. At the moment, though, for some companies, it's a box-ticking exercise, and it needs to shift from being a box-ticking exercise to being a boardroom focus. And that's a job for government to put it on that agenda, make sure that it moves forward. As I said a little earlier, there's significant funding coming through the budget, £3 billion announced in terms of a Green New Deal for jobs. But some of the other things that were announced were really quite interesting as well. £20 million to support the development of floating offshore wind technology. Again, something that we can really lead the world on in that sector. UK-wide competition to implement the first of its kind energy storage prototypes. Again, something that will lead us into new areas that we can drive business growth and drive jobs in that area. Investment into first phase biomass feedstock programs, so that we're working in different ways in that sector too. All of this, though, has got to sit alongside some of the things that we talked about around decarbonising our transport network. We need to take fewer trips by car and reduce our emissions there. And as a result of doing that, we need to think about the public transport sector. And we also need to think about the types of vehicles that we use to get around. We're doing work at the moment in terms of encouraging people to get on bikes. But if we're going to make the shift to electric cars, we've got to make sure that we've got those charging points installed. And again, there's jobs to be created there. And I sort of think back to Dr. Ian, who spoke secondly. And he was talking about our children living their best lives and the impact that air quality has on children. That really was a very powerful message and has to be a driver for tackling pollutants, many of which come from rubber and the impact of tyres in our air quality. I don't know if anybody here has actually driven a hydrogen car yet. I had the pleasure of doing it. I just had a little test drive around Lymm, but there's a bit of a problem with it. It came from Rotherham. Somebody drove it over from Rotherham, and there was nowhere to fill it up. So I couldn't go too far because I had to drive back to Rotherham. And we don't have the technology at the moment. So we don't have the ability to fill up a hydrogen vehicle anywhere in the Northwest. And that sort of investment is required to take us forward. And I was really, really pleased to see the HyNet project being given the green light a couple of weeks back. It's a project that I've really been pushing for with the sector, with other parliamentary colleagues, to get investment into the northwest of England to drive forward hydrogen and carbon capture. And that really will make a big difference for us. I'm conscious of time, and I just wanted to pick up on one or two other little bits in terms of the government's environment bill, because Charlotte talked there about the need to have a new Queen's speech, and as a result of that, the proroguing of Parliament happens, and that means that private members' bills fall. But the government's environment bill is being carried over into the new parliamentary session. It has a few weeks left to complete its report stage. It'll then go into the House of Lords for full scrutiny. And it doesn't hold back on the government's ambition to drive environmental change. It has to move forward. And there is significant legislation coming down the line that really puts the environment at the heart of every government policy-making decision. It will be a legislative requirement. It sets out legally binding targets on biodiversity, on air quality, on water quality, on resource efficiency. It goes back to the future and sees us introducing things like deposit return schemes to drive recycling rates. So there are some really good elements of that bill, which I'm looking forward to seeing coming forward back into the House of Commons so that we can move that forward. And I thought Jen's comments about plastic-free limb were really interesting. I've talked to her before about that, I think, right when I became the Member of Parliament. And, you know, in so many areas, some of the things that we're trying here in Warrington are leading the way, and we need to push those things forward and really deliver that message into Westminster about the challenges that people face when they want to make those changes. I just want to finish off by saying, what else can we do here in Warrington? Well, £1 billion was set aside by the Chancellor to transform schools, hospitals and other public buildings so they can become greener and more energy efficient. Now, Warrington didn't make any applications for any of that funding. We need our public bodies in Warrington to be asking for the cash to come to Warrington. If we don't ask for it, we won't get it. We need funding for Zebra, the zero emissions bus project that's coming forward. We missed out on the bus town, the first phase of that, but there's a new phase coming, and I'm working at the moment with the bus company and with the council to try and drive us forward so that we can get that investment into having probably electric buses in Warrington. We've got the funding already secured for an electric bus depot as part of the town deal, but we need the buses to go in it now as well. We need to drive forward the race to zero with business as well. It's a global initiative. It's backed by science-based targets. We need businesses committing, cities, regions, investors committing in to net zero emissions by 2050 at the very latest. And that race to zero is something that will, I think, be talked about much more during COP26. And we need more local initiatives encouraging children and parents to walk to school. I will be really focusing on this with some projects in schools in Warrington South as we move past the end of this term. Getting our children out of cars and walking to schools is a real priority for us going forward. I want to finish off by saying government are engaged in and is engaged in climate change. I'm engaged in climate change. I really am interested in this part of policy, but it's really important that we collaborate, that we support one another. There are 170,000 people in Warrington. There are 93 people on this tonight. We've got to take every one of those 170,000 people with us on this journey and bring people into the future by making some of the changes that we've talked about tonight. I'm delighted to hand over to Nina Dar, who I think is going to do a little bit of summing up for us.
Thanks, Andy. What an amazing session, everyone. I am really aware that Andy's just taken us to 7 o'clock, which was our official end point, but it has been such an amazing set of stories, knowledge, information shared that we just wouldn't do it justice if we didn't sum it up properly. So please bear with me. I can talk fast and I will talk fast. So here's your roundup of tonight's stories and chat and questions. We started off with Angel, who I won't forget said in 2050, she will still be younger than I am today. That was a very sobering thought. Thanks for that, Angel. And she was talking about the concerns of young people, obvious weather changes, flooding, inequality, privilege, very mature thoughts that our children and young people should not be burdened with right now. Topics that we should be progressing positively to create a society that supports everyone equally. And, you know, those of us who are in that older bracket really should be taking responsibility for that. Then we went on to the amazing Ashley and Emma. Such energy on the stark issue of jobs, current job losses and future predictions, both positive and negative. We can create 1.2 green jobs, 1.2 million green jobs that pay well and enrich people's lives. And that was the real takeaway for me in there, jobs that sustain life, work that is meaningful. We've gone through dark days where lots of people have had to do work that is not meaningful and it doesn't help anybody. Or we could see the devastation of more job losses on top of what we've already seen and further erosion of pay. benefits and jobs that don't allow for us to progress as with the human potential that we know we should all have. And Ben, who has seen how business can get involved, and that generally people are all thinking the same thing, and don't we know that? So he's got involved. People generally don't know what to do with those thoughts until somebody like him turns up and asks them. So asking, sharing, offering to collaborate can see change spread quickly, and that can be UK-wide and even globally. And you manage to get progress in places we might not even think, like Golden Square Shopping Centre. So nice to hear the local stuff going on. James, with one of those unbelievable truths that nature provides us with a way of capturing carbon, and we dig it up and put it in the garden. Seriously, this is an easy thing we can all pledge to do tonight. Stop buying peat. I can't believe any of the people on this session today will go and buy peat after what we've all heard. Let's leave it where it is so that it can do the best for us. Jen's family story surely resonates with all of us. Guilt shopping is a real thing. I know I have it. Trying to make the choices you want is definitely not easy. We need more people like Jen to come forward and share what they are trying to do and how they find it hard. We need governments to put regulations in place, because voluntary standards, voluntary bans, asking people to do the right thing just isn't working. We've been trying that for years and it really isn't working. So we need something stronger than that. I mean, obviously, as I always say to people, how you spend your own money is one of the most powerful things you can do. And of course, Jen was a great example of somebody who's doing that. Richard's beautiful statement that climate change affects humanity at its deepest level, raising profound questions about our relationships with the living world. It was really wonderful to hear about the cross-section of eco-faith groups. I had no idea. Richard also reminding us that we have a great stage leading up to and then at COP26 to accelerate the progress we have made and show the world how we can finally transition away from our fossil fuel era into something more prosperous and life enriching for all of us. The tragic story from Peter about the realities of fuel poverty and the message we should all heed. Change needs to be managed. Otherwise, we create consequences that leave people in worse situations. Our desire to hit targets cannot be at the expense of changing behaviour and re-equipping people with the knowledge that will help them adopt change positively and beneficially. Now, Dina can remember the days when the North was full of coal mines and the transition to oil and gas and the comfort and prosperity that that brought to all of us. And we know that. Recognising the impact of that now underlines the need to the further transition to green, cleaner energy. Changes we can all make, and it is absolutely amazing to know there are 65 U3A climate groups out there, totally fab. Charlotte, great to hear all the things that you were talking about locally, lots of stuff going on in Warrington, and absolutely clear that you are engaged in all of that, but by your own admission, silo thinking, not enough collaboration, maybe not enough cross-party work going on, and things are a lot slower than everyone imagined they would be. And I think if you watched the chat while you were talking, you'd see the passion coming through in people to say, yeah, we hear you, but let's ramp it up. We want to know more, and your offer of how you can be involved going forward will be taken up, I'm absolutely sure. Andy, the same for you. I mean, absolutely amazing to hear that you support this, you personally support this, the government supports this. You know, it's a priority. You want to get off the hill, Andy. That's brilliant. We want you off the hill. You know, we want to tackle climate change through COVID recovery. Brilliant. And again, all stuff, and no one will disagree, stuff that we hear all the time, but action is really slow. it is great to hear that there is an environment bill coming, but I think for most people in this session, they want to know what the difference is between the government's environment bill and the climate ecological bill. What's the difference there? You know, again, are we in situations where we've just got people working on the same thing in different ways? So a really clear message from our MPs that great stuff is going on, and I guess a really clear message back to them that that's brilliant, and we want more, and we want to know more, and we want to be more involved. And on the chat, the Citizens Assembly, and having a Citizens Assembly in Warrington came up several times. And it sounds like our MPs would be very open to that, because what better way of getting involved? And for those of you who might think that I forgot about Dr. Ian, I definitely did not. I left this one to the end for us all to take something away we could remember. Reminding us we can't take for granted our most basic human need to breathe clean air. For God's sake, in this time, let's all think about this for a minute and take a deep breath in with me. Take that deep breath now. And while you're breathing in, think about the mix of pollutants that could be in your lungs right now. When the air was smog and full of coal dust, a time that Dina has talked to us about, we did something about it, albeit that took some fighting for as well. Ian is telling us that we are bringing new life into the world, and their fragile lungs are finding it harder to cope. Just because the air looks cleaner doesn't mean it is. We need regular air monitoring to understand what we need to do, and you don't have to be a doctor to know that traffic creates pollution. Surely we need to know what air we are breathing in. So from a Warrington perspective, that must be something our MPs can get behind right now. So I was asked to pose another question. We are running really short of time, so this will be something that maybe you can give us feedback from in the feedback forms. And that question is to all of you: what kind of action do you want to see on climate locally and nationally? Our call to action for tonight is that we seem to be at a tipping point in Warrington. Lots of initiatives, lots of good work, and hope for what the next transition could bring, but lots of growing awareness of barriers to change, slower than expected changes from the government, and with that, concerns that we are not committed to this as we could be. This event has been organised by the CEE Bill Campaign Group, together with Hope for the Future. For those of you who don't know, that CEE bill is the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill that you have heard mentioned a couple of times. This was drafted by scientists, legal experts, ecological economists, and environmentalists, and designed specifically to reverse the climate and ecological breakdown we face. Parliament declared a climate emergency in 2019, around the same time as Warrington Borough Council, but have their actions matched their words? The bill is asking the UK to take responsibility. Tonight, we in Warrington are asking our MPs to take responsibility. Creating collaborations with the groups already making a difference is a way of increasing the momentum, strength, and power for change. Together, we are definitely stronger. If we stay together, this will help our elected officials, as Charlotte has said tonight, as we can be clear with them as to what we want and what we expect them to do on our behalf, ensuring that support and legislation comes from Westminster. Our diversity is our strength. If you are interested in collaborating, please make it clear on your feedback forms, including what form you think that collaboration should take. Alongside all the questions that you've put in, all the chats that have been going out tonight, we will be putting something together that makes a list of all the asks and continuing this conversation with Andy and Charlotte. So I suppose one last thing, maybe on everyone's mind, Andy, how do we push for that money? Come on, You've got to show us how. We need to do that. So it's been an absolutely brilliant session, and I want to give my huge thanks to Andy and Charlotte for getting involved. And I think that's over to you, Emma.
Thank you so much, Nina, for that wonderful summary and for bringing the event to such a brilliant close. Obviously, we are quite over time now, so I'm going to wrap this up really quickly. Please look out for a follow-up email coming next week that will give you more information about how Hope for the Future can support you, and we'll link you to some of our great online resources. We'll also link you to some more information on how you can get involved in kind of the momentum from this event going forwards. I think we should really see this event as, you know, a brilliant opportunity to build on the inspirational stories that we've heard and that Nina summarised so well, and work to collaborate, as Andy and Charlotte have both mentioned, to build a brighter and better future for Warrington. So at Hope for the Future, we're big believers in making climate campaigning as open and accessible as possible. Though each training session costs us a fee to run, we offer this support for free, and make sure that everyone can have their voice heard on the issues affecting them and their planet. But if you are able, please do consider visiting our website and leaving a small donation to help us continue our work. Or if you'd like to join us on the journey and get access to our weekly newsletter, which is full of like the latest climate news and updates on Hope for the Future and our work, you can become one of our friends. And you can find out more about that on our website, and we'll include the relevant links in your follow-up email. So all that's left to say is thank you again to our wonderful speakers. Thank you to our constituency team for all their hard work in organising this event. Thank you to Nina. Thank you to our Hope for the Future team behind the scenes, and to our MPs for joining us today and sharing your thoughts too. And thank you to everyone for attending. It wouldn't be an event without the audience, so we're really pleased to welcome you. A feedback form will pop up in your browser after this window closes, so please do take a couple of minutes to fill that in if you can spare the time. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you very much for coming.